This is the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, and on paper it promises a lot. A bright curved screen, a fully equipped triple camera system, and a huge 4200 mAh battery. But do all those things translate into possibly the best smartphone of the year? Maybe. Huawei has packed a lot into the Mate 20 Pro, so we'll be covering a lot of ground here. Let's start off with the hardware. Huawei has a whole new look for the Mate 20 Pro. There's a dual curved display, which we've only seen on the Porsche design Mate RS. This is a 6.39-inch Quad HD Plus display with a tall 19.5:9 aspect ratio. The display looks awesome and the colors are pleasant and bright. We got about 500 nits on full brightness, but kick it into automatic brightness and that boosted it up to 660 nits. Sunlight readability is excellent here. So the curved glass doesn't offer any additional features, but it does reduce the overall footprint while keeping the screen large and tall. In turn, this does make the phone a bit harder to hold by its edges like a Samsung phone, but I found that the included transparent case adds a good amount of grip. This unit is a Twilight model, which blends beautifully from blue to purple to black. Even the phone's frame has a gradient finish. This is a beautiful piece of hardware to look at. The blue and green models have a new hyper-optical texture, which feels a lot like a vinyl record. The right side has a red accented power key and volume rocker. There's an IR blaster here at the top, which I have to say I'm glad is still around. At the bottom is a new location for the SIM tray, and an interesting thing about the SIM tray is that it doesn't actually support microSD. And that's because Huawei has invented a new smaller memory card standard called Nano Memory. It's the same size as a nano SIM card, which can potentially reduce the space needed for a hybrid SIM tray. Huawei has consistently had some of the best fingerprint scanners on smartphones for years, and this year is a bit different because Huawei has stepped into a new territory with fingerprint technology, in-display scanning. Huawei calls this its dynamic pressure sensor, and unlike previous implementations from Oppo and Vivo, Huawei went for a solution that was still optical but doesn't show any sign that there's a sensor under the screen. Setting up a new fingerprint does take a while, like a few minutes, but this is because the sensor needs to see your finger as thoroughly as it can so that the sensor can be quick and accurate in practice. It does require a bit more of a press than a traditional fingerprint sensor, but in real life usage it worked consistently and reliably. So if the screen is too dirty or your hands are wet, it may not read your fingers, but that's okay because there's still a whole different method for unlocking the phone: facial recognition. The Mate 20 Pro has the proper 3D facial recognition just like the iPhone's Face ID, complete with the IR camera and flood illuminator. Setting it up is very similar to how you would do it on an iPhone, and once it's set up, it will enable lift to wake, which I found to work very well. Face Unlock works great on the Mate 20 Pro, and it unlocked almost 100% of the time. The only times it wouldn't unlock with my face were in brightly lit outdoor situations, or if the sensors needed to be wiped down. The Mate 20 Pro has dual loudspeakers. One is in the earpiece and the other is actually at the bottom, but there's no speaker grill. And that's because the USB-C port is the loudspeaker. This reminds me of one of the earlier generations of the iPod Touch that had the loudspeaker right in the charger port. For the record, it was a very crappy speaker. The Mate 20 Pro's port speaker doesn't sound too bad. The downside is the speaker is easily covered when playing games or watching videos, and the sound is muffled to maybe half the volume when it's plugged in. The only thing about these speakers is that Huawei uses a tinny speaker on the earpiece for the left channel, and the port speaker on the bottom is the louder one, so the speakers aren't very even. Otherwise, the speaker's sound quality is not far from what you'd expect from another flagship. Clear sound with no distortion at higher volumes. The Mate 20 Pro scored a very good in the loudness test. The Mate 20 Pro comes with EMUI 9.0 and is one of the first Android phones to launch with Android Pie out of the box. This new version of EMUI is refined over EMUI 8, but the biggest difference can be seen visually. The interface is generally brighter, so there isn't as much black background in some of the menus. Of course, if you would like to keep it all black, there's now a dark interface mode in the battery settings. Otherwise, Huawei's in-house apps all have their navigation menus moved to the bottom to make one-handed operation a bit easier. This includes Huawei's new gesture controls. Swipe up to go home, swipe up and hold to see recent apps, and swipe in from either edge to go back. I'm not too crazy about the gestures. Swiping from the thin edges takes some practice and it doesn't flow as well as the iPhone's gestures. So I'm gonna stick to the on-screen buttons for now. I do have to say I'm very glad that Huawei has finally gotten lock screen notifications down, which never worked for me well on previous Huawei phones. Like the iPhone, the lock screen will stay private until you glance at your screen, and this is great because now I can see and reply to my notifications without needing to leave the lock screen. One thing I did notice is that EMUI might take over control of an app's push notifications, so if you do find yourself missing notifications, you'll have to go into the battery setting for that app and allow unrestricted app activity by manually managing it. Everything is buttery smooth on the Kirin 980. This is Huawei's first CPU on the 7nm process, which yields better efficiency while still delivering faster speeds. EMUI is not my favorite Android skin, but it does offer a lot of advanced features and infinite customizations for battery and performance available to anybody that wants to use them. Performance is excellent on the Mate 20 Pro, and we haven't even been able to make it think twice about what it's doing. There's a huge 4200 mAh battery that can easily last 2 days without needing a charge. What's more is that Huawei updated its supercharger this year to a 40-watt brick. I tested this and I was able to get 74% from a dead battery in 30 minutes, 4% above what Huawei claimed. It actually finished charging to 100% in 56 minutes. The only downside is that you need both the original charger and its cable for a supercharger to work. The Mate 20 Pro also supports up to 15-watt fast wireless charging speeds, but Huawei took it a step further and made it so that the Mate 20 Pro can charge other Qi-compatible phones. I found a quicker way to get to this setting. Add a power save toggle to your quick settings and tap hold it as a shortcut to reach the battery settings. The Mate 20 Pro scored 85 hours on our endurance test, and we noticed that the in-display fingerprint always keeps the display awake and was draining the battery a bit more when on standby. So if you relied only on Face Unlock, the adjusted score is 91 endurance hours. We have finally reached the cameras, and there's a lot going on here. A 40 megapixel wide camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto camera, and a 20 megapixel sensor with an ultra wide lens. Huawei has removed the monochrome sensor from previous flagships in favor of the versatility of an ultra-wide sensor. Huawei took it a step further and put autofocus in it, which makes for some really cool macro photography. You can get up to 2.5 centimeters close to the subject and it will still be in focus. Check out these macro shots. Fantastic colors and details. The ultra-wide takes great shots as well, but when shooting people, make sure you keep them away from the edges of the frame so they don't get distorted. The Mate 20 Pro was able to get great looking shots thanks to pixel binning. The 40 megapixel camera and the ultra-wide 20 megapixel camera create a 40 megapixel image that's reduced to a 10 megapixel photo. This makes for some really clear shots with great dynamic range and minimal noise. The 8 megapixel telephoto lens is the only one that's optically stabilized. When switching to 3x hybrid zoom on the camera, you can see the moment when the zoomed camera stabilization clicks in. These images have detail that are just as good as pictures taken with no zoom, in bright light that is. After dark, the telephoto lens has a harder time getting details right. For that, there's night mode. This isn't a mode you need to use very often, as the normal nighttime shots still look great. But if you're going for a dramatic effect and there's not much moving in the scene, nighttime mode is a great way to capture that. The front-facing selfie camera is 24 megapixels and is quite good. There's also a portrait mode that works well for solo or group selfies. I feel like dynamic range, sharpness, and details in the background could be better. For more camera samples of all the camera modes on the Mate 20 Pro, check out the written version of the review at the link in the description. As far as video goes, 4K video at 30 frames per second is the highest standard, and you can record that in either H.264 or H.265 video codecs. Video stabilization is so very good in 4K, and you can even shoot at 4K with the ultra-wide camera. Stabilization when shooting with the telephoto camera only offers optical stabilization instead of the electronic image stabilization in the other modes. There isn't any 60 frame 4K video, as 4K is limited to 1080p. Overall though, videos look great with minimal noise and natural looking colors. You can also take video at 3 times and 5 times zoom, but the image becomes softer and less detailed as you zoom further away. Either way, not many phones will make an image this clear from such a distance. So there's a lot to love about the Mate 20 Pro, and with all that Huawei has jammed into here, there's actually not very much to complain about. There's a huge tall display, there's a big battery in here, and there's a triple camera setup that has every possible feature and function that anyone could ever want from a smartphone camera experience. The hardware is also really nice here, great design by Huawei, and it's not generic looking at all. And Huawei's decision to put the camera in a square layout as its own signature is a great touch by Huawei. So with all that the Mate 20 Pro offers, you're probably wondering, how much is it going to cost? So the base model comes with 6 GB of RAM and 120 GB of storage, and that's going to retail for 1,049 euros. Now, if you consider all the technology that went into this phone, the triple camera system, the in-display fingerprint scanner, it's still a better value considering that it's over 100 euros cheaper than the base model iPhone XS. So if you're someone who's always after the latest and greatest Android experience, or maybe you are a Samsung Galaxy user who is looking to venture outside of the Note or the S series for a while, or maybe you're a professional photographer who's looking for a really premium camera experience from a smartphone, then the Huawei Mate 20 Pro will not disappoint you. This is shaping up to be one of the best smartphones of 2018. So now that you've seen the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, let us know what you think. Leave your comments or questions down below, or you can follow me on Twitter at RickyVTech. Send your questions there as well. And don't forget to check us out over at gsmarina.com for more specs, news, and reviews. My name is Ricky, signing off for GSM Marina. Thank you for watching.